Welcome, Sena, and welcome, David. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to join this interview. I'm very excited that it is actually the two of you that are opening this series on adverse effects of COVID-19 on female. And today we're going to talk about female unemployment. So to start off, we have seen that this pandemic has been referred to as she-cession for the first time in the modern history of recessions. And unlike the Great Recession from 2007, women's employment has been hit more strongly than men's employment in 2020. Can we start off by answering the question, what are the reasons for this?
I can give you two main reasons. First, while regular recessions heavily affect sectors such as construction and manufacturing, in which many men work, the pandemic recession have had its biggest impact on sectors such as hospitality and tourism with high female employment shares. Second, the pandemic also led to school and daycare closures that massively increased parents' childcare needs. And given that mothers provide a much larger share of childcare than fathers do, this would constrain women's ability to work more than men's.
Thank you so much, Sena. I mean, that completely makes sense. This pandemic has really changed things in a much different way than it usually works. But let's also see whether the results differ by country. So do you find different effects by countries? And if so, what can be the explanation for this?
Yeah, so let me first start by saying, yes, we do find different effects by countries. We start out by doing a cross-country analysis, and here we actually do see that the pandemic recession had indeed an unusually large effect on working women across a large set of countries. We do find some heterogeneity in the magnitude of the impact, which also points towards different roles on different channels underlying this. We then actually move on and use micro-survey data from 6 different countries. The US, Canada, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, and the UK. And we find that in the US and Canada and Germany, there is a substantial gender gap in the response of hours worked, which includes here the intensive and extensive margin. In the US, there is also a large gender gap in terms of employment changes, but not so in Germany, which is interesting because this already points towards the role that short-time work schemes or furloughing schemes could have played during the crisis. In the Netherlands, Spain, and the UK, we generally find smaller gender gaps in both employment and hours worked. What we do find, though, is that the largest impact on the gender gap is actually on parents with school-aged children. And that's true across the board. So this clearly points towards the role of school closures and the increased need for childcare. We also do find that the ability to work from home mitigates the gender effects in the reduction of working hours. When we do this and when we analyze this in our cross-country analysis, we do find that countries that have a larger share of jobs that can be done from home, that they experience a smaller gender gap in the reduction of hours, but also a smaller overall hours reduction.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you. So we have definitely seen that there has been different impact on men's and women's employment during the usual recessions and this pandemic recession. Why it is important to think about its different effect and compare those recessions?
This is a great question. So these different recessions, which we call man sessions and she sessions, could have very different effects because of 2 reasons. So first of all, female labor supply is more elastic, which means that it usually reacts more strongly. For many reasons, women's attachment to the labor market is weaker than men's. A she-cession could lead to more women permanently leaving the labor force or working part-time in the future. As a result, a she-cession might cause a more persistent decline in the aggregate labor supply compared to man sessions. Secondly, women tend to provide insurance within the household by adjusting their labor supply in bad economic times. However, this channel is expected to be less effective in a pandemic recession. because there are many families in which both partners lose their jobs and most men are already working full-time and there is not much scope to increase their labor supply further, hence they cannot provide active insurance.
Thank you so much, Sena. Thank you. So, David, you have mentioned that maybe this gender difference in the shock to unemployment could have been mitigated. How is that possible? Can you explain us that a bit more?
So, exactly. So, as I already hinted at earlier, our evidence actually is indicative of like two ways to achieve mitigation. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, are like furloughing schemes or short-time work schemes. As we've seen in the results, as I said, that in the US, we've seen a large hours reduction and a large employment reduction in the gender, like a large gender gap in the hours reduction and the employment reduction. And in Germany, we only find a large gender gap in the hours reduction. That basically shows that furloughing schemes or short-time work schemes are able to keep matches and are able to kind of decrease the gender gap in employment so to protect formal employment relationships. A second measure is the implementation of flexible work schemes. We also believe that this would have certainly helped to mitigate the detrimental labor market effects on women.
Thank you so much, David. So I think that research actually has also shown that probability to work from home is a bit higher for women than for men. And my question is, did this ability to work from home actually help to mitigate the discussed effects?
So yes, definitely. We find that work flexibility in the form of the ability to work from home greatly reduces the impact of the pandemic on gender gaps. The gender gaps in hours work induced by the pandemic arise almost entirely among workers who are unable to work from home. In the UK, for instance, we find that this effect is particularly present for mothers with school-age children. So this suggests that those mothers who couldn't work from home reduced their hours significantly. So to frame it in a different way, this evidence suggests that work flexibility greatly reduces gender differences in the labor market during the pandemic. But on the other hand, there's also evidence that among those working from home, mothers experience a larger decline in the productivity because they simultaneously engage in work and childcare more often than fathers.
Yes, completely true. Thank you so much, Sena. I hope that we're in the last months of pandemic and that we should already start thinking about post-pandemic, for example, post-pandemic labor market. So could you please tell me what are possible implications of your research for the post-pandemic labor market?
So this is actually directly related to what Sena just said in some sense, because we actually expect working from home is there to stay. And it has been argued that telecommuting or some other forms of work flexibility, this has like a very high potential to drastically reduce gender inequality in the labor market, because much of the gender gap actually arises from motherhood penalties, right? And if work flexibility is actually able to kind of lead to a more equal division of childcare and other duties at home, this could actually imply that there is less of a conflict for a mother to have a family and a career. And this in turn would actually lead to smaller motherhood penalties in the future, reducing gender inequality. There's one caveat. We have to note that what Sena just said, that is very important, that work flexibility does not imply a differential impact on the productivity of parents at home, what we've seen in the Netherlands during the crisis. So it would be important to basically see that the equal sharing of childcare burden at home is a crucial ingredient for this channel to actually work.
Okay, thank you so much. My last question for today. So from the point of view as a researchers, although the literature on various impacts of pandemic is really flourishing, can you tell us, is more research needed? And if so, in which subfields?
Yeah, so actually in our analysis in the US, we still find a sizable gender gap for for men and women who don't have kids and who work in the same occupations and industries. So it basically implies that there needs to be another additional channel in place, which is driving this effect. And this would be worth investigating. There are some stories or some further leads. For example, this could be 3-generation households in which grandmothers during the crisis actually step in to take care of their grandchildren. Or it could be that women actually have a stronger labor market response, or basically a stronger labor market reduction to decrease the infection risk of the family. Or there's an increased need for home production, which is taken over by the women during the pandemic, thereby reducing the labor supply. Or finally, maybe women actually start to need to take care of elderly living in the household because some externals are not coming into the house anymore to take care of the elderly. Right? So these are all possible stories which could be investigated further because of this still remaining sizable gender gap of people without kids working in the same industries and occupations. But in addition, we also believe that in general, this interaction of business cycles and household decision-making is very important and should be investigated more because a lot of questions, a lot of decisions actually take place within the household, and this certainly impacts the business cycle.
Thank you so much. Actually, very, very interesting research questions, and hopefully we'll be able to read about the results in the upcoming future.